Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Juneteenth Symposium, sponsored by the African American Museum and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. This symposium is sponsored by the national organization of the association, which we commonly call ASALH, and the Dallas-Fort Worth branch of ASALH. At this time, we'll have Mr. Robert Edison, who will give us the invocation. Mr. Edison is the Curator of Education here at the African American Museum.
Those who can, if you will stand and remain standing for the singing of Lift Every Voice and Sing. But let us bow at this time. Let us bow at this time. Most gracious and all-wise Father, we're so thankful for this opportunity to reflect on our foreparents who made sacrifices so that we might enjoy the freedoms that we have this day. We know many of them unnamed did not make the history books, but they were the ones who built the HBCUs and the institutions that we enjoy this day. They were the ones who taught us that freedom is not free and that each generation must sacrifice and fight the good fight for freedom. We're so thankful for the panelists this day as they share their knowledge with us. And we thank Dr. Opal Lee for realizing that one person can have power. Bless those who are here this day. And we pray that they will take with them the knowledge that will sustain them and help to be more successful in the future than in the past. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Mr. Edison. I am Marvin Dulaney, President of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. The association was founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1915. It is the oldest African American historical association in the country. It is also the sponsor of Black History Month, and it publishes the Journal of African American History and the Black History Bulletin. ASALH also sponsors an annual conference. This year's conference is in Pittsburgh, September 25th to September 29th. You can register for our conference on ASALH's website at www.asalh.org. Our program today is being streamed live on ASALH TV, of course, from here at the African American Museum in Dallas, Texas. So I want to welcome those of you who are online and thank you for joining us. We are sponsoring today's Juneteenth program in conjunction with, of course, with Opal Lee's Walk for Freedom that took place this morning. It took place at 9 o'clock Central Time. For those of you who do not know Miss Opal Lee, she is called the grandmother of Juneteenth because of her efforts to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Now let me introduce you to our panel. and they will, and of course, they will provide you more information about the history and meaning of Juneteenth. Let me start with Don and Jocelyn Pinkert. They are the co-owners of Hidden History, DFW. The company has been in operation for 6 years and has conducted tours for over 5,000 people in the Dallas area. This exciting tour uncovers the forgotten sites of Dallas that were instrumental in developing one of the largest and most vibrant African-American communities in the country. Our panelists, who is the closest to me, is Donald J. Norman Cox. He's a Texas-based public historian. He is the co-founder of the Juneteenth University, an organization that promotes appreciation for Texas's Emancipation Day. Texas's Emancipation Day, of course, was the predecessor of the Juneteenth National Independence Day. Mr. Cox is the author of several books, including Juneteenth 101, Popular Myths and Forgotten Facts, which is also the title of his presentation today. Our musician is Kay Cooks. Kay Cooks is a talented musician and an artist based in Dallas, Texas. Kay has a strong social media presence where he covers some of yesterday's and today's biggest hits. So you will hear him at the end of our program, and of course then he will play in the rotunda after today's program. Without further ado, let me start with Jocelyn and Don Pinkert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dulaney, and thank each of you for coming out and spending some time with us this afternoon. There are many places in history that we can begin our discussion of Juneteenth. For the sake of our conversation today, we're going to start with this very historic photograph that many of you have probably seen many times in your life. This photograph was taken in September 1862, and you will recognize the third gentleman from the left. He is Mr. Abraham Lincoln, who is at this time is President of the United States. The other gentlemen in the photograph are members of his cabinet, and they are assembled to review something called the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation, many of you have probably seen, maybe a copy of it. You may be seeing versions in history books in high school or college. I will tell you that the original draft did not look this impressive. And as a matter of fact, there were several exceptions that people may not be aware. One of the exceptions had to do with portions of Louisiana and at that time Virginia. These parishes and counties were exempt from freeing their slaves as a result of the Emancipation Proclamation. The rationale for that is that they supported the Union. Many of you also may be not aware of the fact that there were several states, 7 exactly, that were exempt from the Emancipation Proclamation. These states included Kentucky, Missouri, West Virginia, Tennessee, Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey. The reason that they were exempt is because they were border states, and they expressed sympathy to the Union, and therefore were given an exemption as it relates to the Emancipation Proclamation.
Now, the emancipation of the enslaved was difficult to enforce in areas where Union presence was scarce or non-existent, like here in Texas. For this reason, as the war progressed, many slave owners from the Upper South fled to Texas with their enslaved or sent them because of the lack of enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. At the beginning of the war, in 1861, there were approximately 200,000 enslaved in Texas. By the end of the Civil War, that number had grown to 250,000. You may be familiar with the movie Gone with the Wind, where the Union troops, they marched through the city of Atlanta, and while the city burned, they freed the enslaved. As a matter of fact, history tells us, as many of the enslaved could hear the fighting in the background from a distance, they would run to the bases and free themselves. Unfortunately, that never happened here in Texas. So, the 2.5 years of delay in freeing the enslaved Texans was more about the defiance of a state and lack of enforcement than about the absence of the enslaved of knowing of their freedom. To get a clearer understanding or a better understanding, let's look at some of the activities of that time. We're going to look at a timeline that is going to lead up to Juneteenth. On April 9, 1865, Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant in Appomattox, Virginia. On April 14, President Abraham Lincoln is assassinated. Even after the surrender and the assassination of Lincoln, there are still states, including Texas, that continue to fight. And in Texas, Pendleton Murray, the governor, he sends negotiators to New Orleans, and he's trying to negotiate. He wants to negotiate the surrender of Texas without any military presence. That never happened because the Confederates refused, the Union refused to negotiate with any of the Confederates. And on June 2nd, 1865, Galveston is finally overturned and becomes a part of the Union. On June 12th, Governor Pendleton Murray flees to Mexico. And on June 13th, 4,000 cavalry troops were en route to Texas from Shreveport to Houston. Another 4,000 was coming from Alexandria, Virginia to San Antonio. Days afterwards, just like today, out in the Gulf of Mexico, there's a storm. 16,000 men of the 25th Corps were headed to Corpus Christi and Brownsville. And because of bad weather, they are diverted to Galveston. And these soldiers, these 16,000 soldiers, were the U.S. Colored Troop. And we know the history now. On June 19th, Gordon Granger arrives in Galveston via ship with Union soldiers. So when we look at the history, we see that just in Texas alone, there were 32,000 Union soldiers on land here. And guess what? Half of them were African Americans. General Gordon Granger staff releases general orders. With General Order Number 3, it's often called the Juneteenth Order, emancipating the enslaved here in Texas. What did the general order say? What did it really say? Basically, it said two important things. First, all slaves are free. It also said there is absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between the former masters and the enslaved. And from this day forward, the enslaver is the employer and the enslaved are hired laborers. The freed men were told to stay where they were and work for wages. And they also was told, don't come to the military post or become idle. So General Order Number 3 was nailed to county courthouse doors. Troops rode to plantations and farms, and they read the order. Now, we all have ideas on how the freed men and women reacted upon hearing of their freedom. But we want to provide you today with a dramatization and then with an actual account of what our people, our ancestors, how they actually reacted. Here's the dramatization first.
Being free means we're finally going to be equal to the white man.
Juneteenth, it was the 20th, but the 19th when it was told to us.
It's time to vote for me to take part in this democracy.
Tell them freedom papers up, please, cause we don't need to show ID.
It's June 19th, we celebrate.
Grab a blonde and miscegenate.
Ooh, ain't that something? I can finally whistle at a white woman.
I'ma start a business. I'ma get along. I'ma move to the burbs and buy me a home. I'ma take a vacation and when I'm gone,
They won't burn crosses on my lawn. I can sit at the counter all day long.
And I won't get sprayed with a fire hose.
when I get reparations, I'ma act a fool. Plant my 40 acres and go strike the mule. My 40 acres and a mule.
Get my 14 acres and a mule. Get my 14 acres and a mule.
Now, that's dramatization, but we're going to provide you with a summary. This is an actual account of how free men and women reacted on one particular plantation. This is the Stroud Plantation. And we get this information from the book that's on the left, The History of Negroes of Limestone County. Journal Order number 3 was read by the plantation owner, Logan Stroud. Many shouted for joy and began singing and dancing. Uncle Alfred Connor walks through the log cabins and becomes concerned about the people because they are free but have nothing. Those that choose to leave the plantation have to empty the straw from their mattresses and pillows. Grandpa Davy builds an improvised pulpit and gets down on his knees and prays. He gets up, singing a hymn as the crowd gathered. It is said that this sermon planted the seed of Christian citizenships in the hearts of the Negroes, and the older ones claimed it saved them from destruction.
Many of you may think with today's sensibilities that at the end of the Civil War and the reading of Journal Order number 3, surely the enslaved would immediately pack up and leave the plantations. But it was not a simple decision as we look at it as it actually happened. As a matter of fact, it was quite a dilemma. Many of the enslaved had to deal with the question of, should I stay or should I go? And for you to get an idea of some of the turmoil that existed at that time, I'll read you a couple of direct quotes. I won't read you all 4 of them. I'll just focus in on one for those who chose to stay. And I'll read the second quotation. It said, "A poor living seemed a better alternative than being turned loose like a bunch of wild hogs." So this person obviously wanted to be free, but they had a lot of anxiety because they did not know what the future held. And for those who wanted to go, once again, I'll just read you the last quotation. And it's one of my favorites of all time. This gentleman says, "We thought we were going to be richer than the white folks because we were stronger and knew how to work, and the whites didn't. And we didn't have to work for them anymore." So, as you can tell, this is a very optimistic person. And you can contrast him with the previous quotation. He is optimistic about his future, and he decides to go, even though his future is uncertain. We also think it's important to really understand what was happening in Texas at that time, to understand what the major newspapers were publishing as part of their editorial comments. And so there were 2 major newspapers. Dallas was not a major city. The major cities in Texas at that time were Houston, Galveston, San Antonio. And so the 2 leading newspapers was one from Houston. And I'll try to read a comment from one of the Houston newspapers. It says, "To wake up one morning and found it is their duty to tell all of their servants that they are free and they no longer have any legal claim upon their time and labor. and to begin to make bargains with them for their hire. This will be hard, an unhappy trial to the taste and the feelings of the people of Texas. So obviously, from the perspective of the white people, as resonated in the newspapers, they were also very unsettled with this new world. And I won't read the middle one. I'll try to focus on the last comment from the Galveston newspaper. And this is from maybe the most powerful newspaper man in the state of Texas. And he writes, "The amendment to the federal constitution abolishing slavery has not been ratified by 3/4 of the states, nor it is likely to be in the incoming 10 years. When the state governments, therefore, are reorganized, it is more than probable that slavery will be perpetuated." So here's a very powerful man in Galveston, maybe one of the most powerful men in the state of Texas. And his outlook is, this is nothing. It'll blow over. We just need to stand our ground.
With the end of the Civil War and the beginning of Reconstruction, there was no immediate consensus of how and when slavery ended. Across the country, various groups chose to celebrate emancipation on various days, from Rhode Island to Delaware. January 1st became one of the dates that would celebrate emancipation. This was the date of Lincoln's final emancipation. Others chose September the 22nd, the date of Lincoln's first Emancipation Proclamation. And even others in different regions chose to honor April 9th. They called that Surrender Day, the day that Lee surrendered to the army of Ulysses S. Grant. And while various dates of the end of slavery were celebrated, Juneteenth emerged through popular consensus of people to be the date to celebrate emancipation. In the beginning, in the months and years following the end of slavery, there was numerous reports and violence against freed blacks. Because of this, the first celebrations of Juneteenth was informal, mostly in churches, tying the celebration to the religious culture of free people and for protection. In larger towns, celebration was held in public spaces. One of the largest celebrations of the holiday was in 1866 in Houston. They had a planned barbecue or parade, speeches, and community gatherings. Also in San Antonio. As the years advanced, many communities competed to see which town would put on the largest Juneteenth celebration. As early as the 1870s, African Americans purchased land for the express purpose of celebrating Juneteenth. In Houston's 3rd Ward, you have Emancipation Park. In Dallas's Uptown, you have Griggs Park. And in Limestone County, you have Comanche's Crossings, Booker T. Washington Park, where for decades was the epicenter of Juneteenth celebrations.
There were periods where the celebration of Juneteenth faded a little bit in terms of being an annual African-American celebration. Some of the reasons that I won't go into all of them, but most of you are probably somewhat familiar with American history, and you know that in the early 20th century, America basically promoted itself as that shining city up on the hill. Bring us your tired, you're hungry, and we will take care of them. In the minds of many, that was inconsistent with the celebration of a holiday celebrating the liberation of citizens in that country, or in our country. Many of you also know that this was a period where many of the Jim Crow laws that we study in history were enacted. This made it difficult for many African Americans in certain parts of the country to celebrate the holiday. You also know that this was also a period of the Great Migration. It was positives associated with it in terms of the Juneteenth holiday. The Juneteenth holiday was carried from Texas and from the South to other parts of the country. The negative is that 6.2 million people left the South, so there were less people in place to celebrate the holiday. And finally, as many of you know, and we battle today with the Civil War monuments all over the South, this was a period, not directly after the Civil War, but in the early 20th century, when these statues and monuments were erected, once again making it difficult to hold public celebrations to celebrate the liberation of our people. Just real quickly, some of you may know this gentleman, particularly if you're from Houston. This is former Representative Al Edwards. He's no longer with us, but he is the person responsible in 1979 for finally getting June 19th recognized as an official state holiday, along with Governor Bill Clements, in the state of Texas. Today, as we celebrated here at the Fair Park, many, many millions of people are celebrating Juneteenth with parades, pageants, music, and food.
The most dominant color of the Juneteenth food is red. The red color signifies resilience and the bloodshed of enslaved people who never knew freedom. Foods like watermelons, strawberries, barbecue, and red drinks were always and continue to be part of the celebrations. Historians have said the eating of red food was brought to Texas by the enslaved from the Yoruba and Congo, who is present-day Nigeria, Ghana, Togo, Benin, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Along with the red foods, we have prosperity foods also prepared. Foods like collard greens to represent good fortune, black-eyed peas, which symbolizes wealth or luck, is eaten with red rice, and the corn and cornbread added to the meals represent gold. The meal shared in the beginning was more like a church picnic. The tradition continues today in festivals, block parties, and family gatherings.
As many of you know, Juneteenth is celebrated on military installations and bases around the world. I was also shocked this morning. The first thing I saw when I woke up this morning was Japanese observance of Juneteenth in Japan.
The flag. The flag was designed in 1997 by Ben Hath of Boston. He added the date in 2007. The flag uses the colors of red, white, and blue from the American flag, and it's intentional. It is meant to convey the message that all enslaved people and their descendants are Americans. The star represents freedom of African Americans in all states. Some people say it represents Texas. The burst outline around the star is inspired by Nova. Running through the arc of the center of the flag horizontally is that arc, and it symbolizes a new horizon of opportunity for Black people. You guys know her. This is Miss Opal Lee. We call her the mother of Juneteenth. She was here today. Some of you all walk with her. And this one woman is the reason why Juneteenth is there. And on June 17, 2021, Juneteenth National Independence Day Act was signed into law, making June 19th a legal holiday. And Juneteenth marks the universal ending of the institution of slavery in the United States.
This is a reading list, but I'm not going to go into it. As a matter of fact, we're going to stop right here for the sake of time, and I want to give my fellow panelists, Mr. Donald Cox, an opportunity to address some of the myths, and to the gentleman in the back, we'll have a period of question and answers after Mr. Cox.
Okay, let's give our Don and Jocelyn a round of applause. We're going to do something a little different with Donald Cox. As you heard me say earlier, he's written a book about some of the popular myths about Juneteenth. So I'm going to start him with a prompt. And indeed, what are some of the popular myths about Juneteenth?
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here also. The most obvious one that glares out has already been mentioned, but it doesn't seem to go away, and that is that news of the Emancipation Proclamation was late reaching Texas. It was not. the first newspaper that I first mentioned that I found in a newspaper was published 10 days before Lincoln issued the thing. And it was in a newspaper in a tiny little town, and if that little town had it, everybody else had it also. I mean, they didn't have a Washington correspondent, to tell them what was going on there. They got the word like everybody else, which was by telegraph, and they published it, as I said, 10 days before. And not only did they publish that announcement, they didn't call it Emancipation Proclamation. They called it Universal Emancipation. And so the original research to find out how, what was going on around that time, you'd have to look that term up, Universal Emancipation, and you'll find a wealth of additional information that if you only look up Emancipation Proclamation, you would miss. And so that was the first announcement, and then there were many, many additional announcements and a lot of debate in newspapers across the state. My interest in this topic came because there was a department at University of North Texas called the Multicultural Center. And I was there one day talking with some students, laughing about things that don't make sense. One student asked, how did news get from Louisiana to New Mexico without going through Texas? And so we kind of laughed about that and said, that's a good question. And so that initiated my interest in this, and found that there were a lot of information that we had that was wrong. That's the biggest myth that we did not know. The second thing, part of that is that Gordon Granger came to Texas to inform them. He did not. He was part of the enforcement effort. They already knew, they just didn't care. And because they didn't care, and because the military was not present to enforce it, that is what kept slavery going in Texas. Let's get something clear here. When we talk about that 2.5-year thing, one of the implications is that everybody else, all of the other states, were emancipated when the proclamation came out. That's not true. The Louisiana's date, their formal date, is really just a few weeks before Juneteenth. Florida's date of emancipation was May 20th. And you can just go down the line. All of every state that had enslaved people has an emancipation date. And nobody's date is in 1863. Nobody, And so it makes it sound as though Texas was so far behind everybody else. No, we were 2 weeks, 2 weeks behind everybody else. That's it. Get over it. And so everybody else held on as long as they could. As was mentioned, the enslaved people ran away when the Union Army came nearby. Now, here's something that's going to make you go, oh, I'm going to scratch my head on that one. Okay. That same thing happened after the war in Galveston. The people of Galveston were not notified on June 19th because they were already freed on June 18th. They freed themselves. They heard that the military had arrived there is something called the country. I have yet to figure out exactly what the country is, when you're talking about Galveston. But as best I have been able to determine, the country when referring to Galveston, is actually talking about Galveston County on the mainland side. Okay, so when they found out, the people in the country found out that the military had arrived in Galveston on the 16th, 17th, and 18th, on the 18th, they left and emancipated themselves and were in Galveston celebrating. And that celebration continued on into the 19th when Gordon Granger showed up. So he didn't come and say, look, yo, all free. No, they were already there, celebrating. That's, ironically, there is a newspaper story that is reported, that was written by the Galveston newspaper about that, but they never published it. They sent it to other newspapers. Houston and Austin published it. I haven't found any other cities that published it, but they told the story of what really happened. For whatever reason, that is completely lost, and we look at Galveston as though they were all emancipated. No, they were rounded up. They were rounded up and put back into slavery. 50 refused to tell who they belonged to, so they were forced at gunpoint to go work on the ships. And they had to continue and stay wherever they were until the Bureau came to write contracts for them so that they would work. Now, while they were while they were at home waiting on the Bureau, which showed up 2 months later, those people were not. I say this a lot of time, and if you ever heard me talk, I'm sorry, I'm repeating it. I'm going to continue repeating it. Those people were not sitting on the porch drinking mint juleps, waiting on the Bureau to come and write contracts for them. They were working, and they could not leave they were free to go wherever they wanted to go if they had written permission to go, and that permission had to come from the people that they were working for. Now, do you really think that they got that permission? There's nothing that's written about it, but let's use some thinking here. They couldn't go anywhere without written permission. They had to work and were not getting paid because they didn't have contracts. Those two things together says slavery continued. They just did not have a word for it. They were called freedmen, but they didn't have that. Now, that's for the people in Galveston. In other locations, they were being freed, because the word was sent out and the soldiers were sent out to do that. But in Galveston itself, those people were not freed. That General Order Number 3 was issued, that day, issued, but that's it. It was just words in Galveston. That was a long answer. I'm sorry.
Yeah. How long did it take to free enslaved people in Texas from slavery?
The last, when the way you have posed that question, that means when was the last people freed? Okay. As best I have been able to determine, that was several years after June 1865. And the last one that I were able to determine were people who were on they were hidden in a farm somewhere, and the owner of the farm was a thief. He was a professional thief, that was his profession. And so he was stealing somewhere in a town, and he didn't get away. Normally he got away. This time he did not get away. They killed him. And so when they went to his farm to tell his next of kin or somebody, they found this barn filled with enslaved people who had not been emancipated. And this was several years after, I think it was in 68, you know, when all, with that in mind, let's think about something else. The last payment for a slave, last slave sold in Texas was sold in Dallas in 1900. You ready for that? 1900. He was dead already, but they had already sold him, and the people who bought him didn't want to pay for it, and so the family stayed in court, the two families, on and on and on until it got to be embarrassing because the owner or the seller, one of the two, I'm not certain, was the McDonald family, which is the namesake of the University of Texas McDonald Observatory. And they didn't want that reputation, and so they agreed to pay the bill, and sweep this under the rug. And so he was dead, but no.
Okay. Well, we want to take some questions in the few minutes we have for questions and answers. Anyone? I'm going to bring you the microphone because we want to hear your question.
Hey, Dr. Dulaney. Lem Patterson from ASALH in Savannah, Yamacraw, Georgia. A couple of myths that we've heard. One, that there were two messages coming to Texas by covered wagon. The first black was murdered. The second got the message here. Have you heard of that before? And it is a myth, but I wanted to hear, is it just on the East Coast, or have you ever heard of that before?
Do you want the honors?
Yeah, I've heard of that myth before.
Okay.
I will say that, as my wife said in the early part of our presentation, if emancipation was a secret, it was the worst kept secret in America. Right. So, as we said, it showed in the timeline, weeks before the Union Army arrived.
Use the mic. Use the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. So as I was saying, weeks before the Union soldiers arrived, Texas Governor Pendleton Murray sends a delegation to New Orleans to meet with the Union soldiers. And his objective is to prevent the occupation of Texas. Essentially, his message is, we've got this under control. We know that Lee has surrendered. We have lost the war. But what we want to prevent is Union occupation. I used to live in Virginia, in Northern Virginia, and people would often come and visit Bull Run, Gettysburg, all those kinds of places, looking for artifacts from the Civil War. In Texas, that doesn't happen. There are no major battles in Texas. Texas represented the western frontier of the war, so there was no Union occupation. So the last thing officials in Texas wanted was to have 32,000 troops come across the border and set up martial law in the state of Texas. So I think that there may have been messengers, but in reality, for most Texans, the first time they see that the Union Army is for real is when they see 4,000 people marching from Shreveport, another 4,000 coming from Alexandria, Virginia, 16,000 U.S. colored troops. That is a massive, massive show of force in this state. And that's what led to freedom, not one or two messengers showing up, sharing the word.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
To add to that, some of the, I'm glad you acknowledged the fact that you knew it was not true. But it kind of speaks to itself in that the version that I heard and that circulates around here is that a messenger was sent from Washington to Texas. The logical question then is, who was he supposed to tell? When he got here, and one soldier wearing a Union uniform probably was not the best idea, going through the South. I mean, there's so many pieces of that that's just plain asinine you know, but it makes for a good story, you know. Yes.
We have time for one more question. Where? Raise your hand.
I think Dr. Gill.
Front row. Excuse me. Okay.
Real quick, I didn't get the name of your book. I understand you have a book, and is it for sale? And then my second question, as I sit here learning all of this over the past 2 years as a retired educator, did you all teach Juneteenth in your curriculum here in the state of Texas anywhere? Is there like Texas history with that part being one of these standards? Is there a curriculum guide or anything over the years here in Texas?
Dr. Dulaney?
Yes.
Just a point of personal privilege here. That gentleman in the back, he was the first one to raise his hand, and I promised him he would get an opportunity.
Well, I asked him, and he backed down on me.
I was born here in Dallas, and I was in the Johnson Middle Elementary.
So talk to you tonight.
I don't need it. And I had a black teacher named Miss Price. I never forget it in 4th grade. She taught us black history. And the one thing that she taught us was that the Emancipation was signed January 1st, 1863, and it didn't reach Texas until Juneteenth of 1865. Correct or not?
Incorrect.
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 Your question about the book is upstairs in the
gift shop.
In the gift shop, right there at the door. Looks like this. Yeah. The name of it is Juneteenth 101. Right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's thank our panel again for their presentation. All right. Now we'll have music by Kay Cooks, guitars.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kay Cooks. It's an absolute pleasure in being here this afternoon. I am a professional musician here in Dallas, Texas. When Mr. Dulaney gave me a call maybe 8 hours ago to do this, I was ecstatic. So I'm definitely appreciative of this opportunity, so thank you again. I'm just going to play a few tunes from from a few of our most influential black artists. I'm going to let you all choose because I know we're pressed for time. Luther Vandross, Michael Jackson, or Prince? What you guys want to? I heard Luther first. Let me try that one. Is that one working? There we go. There we go. So I am doing autographs. So if you do want one, no, I'm just kidding. Just teasing. Just teasing. Okay, so I think I have time for one more. Prince. All right, let's try it. Let's try it. I was gonna do Prince anyway, so if somebody said Michael Jackson, I was. Guys, that was a door. That was a door by Prince Roger Nelson. I do perform all around town. You can check my website or my Instagram, Facebook. My Instagram is K Cooks Music, and by the looks of it, my email is kcooksmusic@gmail.com. Thank you guys so much again. I will be performing upstairs here shortly, and if you guys have any requests, go ahead and keep those to yourselves. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, K Cooks. Thank you, K Cooks. We appreciate your coming out on short notice. Our original performer, Gabrielle Clover, the violinist, could not make it, and so I was just lucky that she referred me to K Cooks, so thank you, K Cooks. Let me thank Walter, Stephen, and Aniatia for putting this all together. All right. Now, of course, Donald and Jocelyn, thank you for your presentations today. All right. And, of course, we are, as I said, we are streaming live on ASALH TV, so we're actually getting ready to shut it down. But this program, we record all these programs on ASALH TV. So if you join the association, and we have a table upstairs, you can actually access this program on YouTube. Okay, so thank you again. Thank you for coming out. And again, K Cooks will be in the Rotunda playing until about 2 o'clock today. So thank you so much, and we'll see you upstairs.